Hey guys, this is RJ the Fed. We're going to do a video where we talk about some different bourbon terms that you guys might not know if you're newer to the scene or maybe just need a refresher on. So the first one we're going to talk about is bourbon. Well, what makes whiskey bourbon? Well, all bourbon must be made entirely in the United States. I'm reading off my notes here, so I'm going to have a lot of eye contact I'm going to break away on. The mash bill for it must be at least 51% corn. It has to be aged in new or charred oak containers. Only water can be used and added to it to the distillate, so no coloring agents are allowed in a bourbon. And bourbon can only be distilled to 160 proof or 80% ABV, which is your alcohol by volume. That's important because they'll proof it down later, but that's the maximum proof that it can be to be labeled as a bourbon. It must enter the barrel to age at a maximum of 125 proof. And then when bottled, it must be 80 proof or higher to remain a bourbon. Next term, ABV, we just talked about it. Alcohol by volume, it's a percentage. Next that goes with that is they're on every label for any bottle. Examples, we got 50% alcohol. This is going to be 100 proof, so we're going to talk about proof. Proof is double the ABV for our system here, so nice and easy to remember. The reason why proof exists is the government wanted to place a tax on liquor containing a higher amount of alcohol. So that alcohol content was determined by the government, who would do a weird test where they would soak a bullet in alcohol and try to set it on fire so the gunpowder would burn. If it lit and the alcohol content in the liquor was high enough, the gunpowder would ignite. If it wasn't, it would take longer for it to ignite, and that would kind of give them a range on whether it was a higher alcohol percentage or not. The liquor was to be deemed to be a proof spirit if it caught fire. Because this method of providing proof of alcohol content wasn't very precise or reliable, there was a new system that was put in place that was by England, and that system changed the system of establishing proof in the year 1816. The new system involved scientifically precise measuring of density and gravity and set the proof threshold at 57.06% alcohol by volume. So, this measure was standardized in the year 1952, and in the UK, a 100 proof spirit is about 57% ABV, and the ratio of proof ABV is 4 to 7. Some math behind that, but if you multiply the ABV, or alcohol by volume, by 1.75, you get the proof. And then around 1980, the UK began to adopt a straight ABV scale. So this scale is required on labeling of spirits. And in the United States, that system was then established around 1848. Simply put, proof is straight up 2 times the alcohol by volume. So just to make it easier, now we're not doing math. If it's 50% alcohol, it's 100 proof. It's 100 proof, it's 50% alcohol. 45% alcohol is 90 proof, 90 proof, 45% alcohol, just double or half. All right, moving on to the next term, distillate. That's whiskey that's straight from the still before it's put into a barrel for the aging process, and the nickname for that is White Dog. I did a review a little bit back. It was Buffalo Trace. They had a White Dog mash bill 1. That was their wheated one. All this is just the raw form of it. It's going to be a clear spirit that has no age to it. Next term we're going to talk about Angel's Share. It's a euphemism for the amount of spirit lost during the aging process due to evaporation. Now, since most bourbons evaporate while aging, this means that the ABV, the alcohol by volume, rises and is often cut with water to replace the Angel Share, or even to lower it to the preferred levels for the taste by the blender. So Angel Share is why there's a maximum of 125 on barrel entry proof. That means when you put it in, it's got to be a maximum of 125 proof before it goes in that barrel, and then as high as 160 during the end of the prohibition for a short time as well. So Angel Share is going to be that empty space in that barrel after the aging process has taken place because of evaporation. They'll add filler to it, such as water, or depending on if it's not a bourbon but maybe a whiskey that's finished, they'll add different flavors or woods to help create more filler space to where you have a more full barrel Otherwise, you'll have barrels with a lot of headspace that just is emptied from evaporation. Next term, we got age statements and aging. Aging refers to a period when the whiskey has been cast and resides in the barrel to enrich and mellow out, interacting with the wood. The Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau requires age statements for whiskey bottled under 4 years. So if it's under 4 years, they have to have an age statement on it. Typically, it's going to be a 2, 3 year or 4 year age statement. I've never seen anything as low as 1. That being said, they have voluntary declarations of bottles' ages, but must show the minimum age of a whiskey if it's blended. So if it exceeds that 4 year mark, they don't have to put the age statement on it. If it is blended, though, they are required to put the lowest age statement on that bottle if they're going to put an age statement on it. So an example is, I think the biggest one I can think of is probably like a Calumet 16. Some of those are a 10 and 16 year blend. I've had one before at a buddy's house. They can't label it as a 16 year because it was blended with 10 year. They have to put that 10 year age statement on there, but they can still put the 16, but they have to have the lower one on there if they're going to put the 16. So you'll have a 16 with a 10 year blend, so that way it's transparent because you don't really know the percentage. Maybe they used only 1% of this 16 year and 99% of it was 10 year. So to be more transparent, they have to put the lowest age statement on that. A lot of talking, but here's our next one. We're going to go to barrel entry proof. This isn't really like too concerning or pertaining to us. This is more for a distiller, but that's the proof of the distillate at the time it's barreled. Entry proof is mainly of concern of distillers and who can maximize their profits by aging high proof bourbons in limited barrel space and then cutting them down to desired proofs. So why you might have a higher one is because if you have this really high alcohol content one, you can cut it down and water it down to where you're not using as much distillate, you're using more water to cut it to the proof you want. Therefore, watering it down is going to give you more juice for what you put in the barrel. You'll get more out of it. Next term, we got barrel, cask, strength, or uncut. I got a couple examples. We have a bottle of Old Forester, and then I have an empty bottle of Stag 22A. So, examples on this one. This is a single barrel strength Old Forester. So these kind of had some synonyms that were kind of worked into here when you talk about interchanging barrel strength and strength or uncut or unfiltered. Essentially, barrel strength is going to be as close as it can for that proof point as what it came out of the barrel. So they're not going to proof it down any. Same thing with Stag. Stag specifically says barrel proof and unfiltered down here on the bottom. Let's see. The barrel proof, though, it doesn't have to be like 100% accurate with what it came out of the barrel. It can be within 2 degrees lower than the proofing assessed for tax purposes. So this one's 132.2 proof. It may have came out of the barrel at 134 and they proofed it down a couple, 1 and 1.8. That's still within the 2-point range. That's acceptable. Next example, we got bottle of Benchmark. Let's see if we can put that here. Full proof. So full proof is a type of barrel proof that's cast and bottled at 125. The term full proof gets thrown around a lot. Example is like Buffalo Trace. They came out with full proof. I think it's a new release that hasn't quite hit stores yet. I think it's labeled at 114, but typically if you see the word full proof, you can assume that it's going to be 125 proof, or half that is 62.5%. And then you got high proof or overproof. So we can bust these guys back out, the Stag and the Old Forester, because they're going to be more high proofers. I think those are my highest proofers that are in here. High proof is generally just starts out at 100 proof and caps around 125 proof for high proofers. And then overproof is safe for bottles that are typically above 125, which both of these are. This one's going to be 129 proof. And then once again, this one's going to be 132.2 proof. So that'll be a high proofer. And then there's another term that we use as well called Hazmat. That's anything that is at 140 proof or above. So an example of that, which I don't have here on the table, would be like a Jack Daniel's, like Coy Hill. A lot of those are going to be 140, 141, 142 proof. Those are considered Hazmat. Let's make a little bit of room so we move these off out of the frame, or just right out of the frame. We have bottled in bonds, and this is a bonded. So let's make sure I get these back in frame. Bottled in bond, bonded, or aged in bond are three terms that we'll describe here. That's to ensure production standards of bourbon worth drinking. The Bottled in Bond Act requires bonded spirits to be distilled in a single season. It has to be in a single location, and bonded whiskey must be aged a minimum of 4 years or longer in wooden containers. And for it to be labeled as a bourbon that's bottled in bond, bourbon has to be used in oak barrels. Distillers can add nothing except water to reach the desired 100 proof. So if we have our full proof here and we want to cut this down in order to make it a bonded, as long as it fit the other requirements, the only way we could reach that 100 proof would be to add water. Now, additionally, bonded bourbons can't contain other types of whiskey or vice versa, even if the other spirit qualifies as bonded as well. Now, qualified whiskeys are inspected by agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, during storage in bonded warehouses. So these are kind of like government-sanctioned storages where they'll have them come in, they'll make sure everything's compliant to help with those age statements. So anything that has bonded on it had to go through a little bit more rigorous standards than your other bourbon or whiskey that you might have. Next term, charcoal filtered. So charcoal filter, just what it sounds like, it's putting the whiskey through a filter that's made of charcoal, and it's meant to mellow out the distillate prior to barreling to soften it in a few days that might otherwise take years. So I don't know of specific distilleries that use this, but I would assume it would be places that have maybe rougher climates like Texas or California, where their age statements on most of their whiskey is rather low. They might use this process to help get that desired flavor and taste early on, so that way they don't have to leave it in there for more than 3 or 4 years due to climate. Chill, non, or unfiltered is a process involving the passing of cold whiskey through several filters before bottling. This is for visual appeal, as unfiltered whiskey can appear foggy or hazy. Typically, the haze or fog is only seen if the spirit is chilled or cold, if you're serving it cold. So if the drink's neat, you probably won't notice it. But if you have like a glass of whiskey and you have a big rock, like a craft ice, ball ice, or you have it chilled in like a frozen or frosted glass with some whiskey stones, you might see that the whiskey doesn't look as clear and transparent if it hasn't been filtered. Over oaked is our next one. It's a matter of opinion, I guess, but some whiskeys, they come across as like the flavor, the age from the wood is just very strong. So it's more of just an over soaking in the wood. It comes out to dominate the spirit. Typically this will have a nutty, earthy, or wooden flavor. That's how you'll know if it's over oaked, but that's kind of an opinion base. Next one is going to be finished, finishing, or barrel finished. Different woods can offer new aspects to a bourbon, as can barrels that have previously housed like rum, wine, or brandy. Example of this was like that Angel's Envy that I had. It was in, I want to say, wine cask. You have some that are aged in different casks that will change that flavor profile. That's a finish on them. Let's see. So the finishing does not replace the required new oak barrel aging minimum of 2 years for straight whiskey or 4 for bonded, but the regular bourbon has no minimum for aging. That's just a little adder for the finishing part of it. Next topic will be 4-grain. It's a mash bill using 4 different grains. It's kind of self-explanatory. The most common ones are going to be corn, barley, rye, and wheat. The next one will be talking about high rye. High rye description generally lives in the realm of 20 to 35% to be labeled as a high rye. Although you could go all the way up to 49% and still call it a bourbon, it would just mean that the other 51% would have to be corn for it to be called a bourbon, which would mean you'd be skipping out like the malted barley, so you would change the flavor profile greatly. Next one, we got an example of this one. We got a Weller Special Reserve, which is a wheated bourbon. Another example, that would be like Maker's Mark. Wheated bourbons, instead of using rye in the remaining mash bill, which is usually 15 to 20%, although as high as 49% would use the wheat. Another term, this is more about the actual drinking of alcohol or tasting, sampling. Kentucky Chew. It's a term that's used for tasting whiskey. Basically, you get like not a mouthful, but you get a little bit in your mouth and you swish it around almost like it's a mouthwash. And that's to coat the entire mouth and palate and activate as many taste buds as possible before trying to either swallow it, or some people, if they're doing a big tasting, might even spit it into another glass to pour out. Typically, I'm still going to drink that, so I'll only have like a little mouthful, swish it around, get all those flavors, and try it out for myself so we can start talking about different tasting notes that you might get. That's the best way that you can really get tasting notes, in my opinion. Next term would be the nose. So that's just like it says, your nose. So you're going to be smelling this alcohol. There's different ways of doing it. The sniffing of the fumes of the alcohol to try to get a scent. And those scents are going to typically be your notes that you're going to have in tasting. So you might smell something like an ethanol burn, or you might smell like a charred oak, a leather, caramel, vanilla, cherry, like whatever flavors you think you might taste, you'll probably smell before you taste them. Another term about drinking, the word neat. It means there's no ice, there's no mixers, it's just a glass with whiskey in it. So just straight from the bottle, pour it in there. That's neat. Our next term will be single barrel. I think we have, this Old Forester is actually also a single barrel. It's pretty self-explanatory. Single barrel means that this bottle of whiskey, all the whiskey that's in this bottle came from a single barrel. So they'll take a single barrel, they'll fill as many bottles as possible, and whatever is left over in that barrel, if they can't fill up an entire bottle, they won't call it a single barrel. It'll be a blend of two. Some have taken it off. I don't have a bottle with me right now because I'm at a buddy's house, but like Eagle Rare, they removed the single barrel statement on it because sometimes that last bottle is a combination of two barrels, but for the most part, Eagle Rare is still a single barrel, with the exception of a single bottle out of that might just be a blend of two barrels. Reserve. Those are barrels that are held back by the distillery, and they're used for special releases typically, or for like they want to keep the best batch out of their barrels. Examples of this is the barrel gets rated by like a professional noser. This is from my knowledge, and it's labeled on like a percent scale. So if the barrel ranks between 90 and 100%, like the distillery is going to keep that barrel. It's like their best of that batch. They're not going to just give that out. It's going to be limited releases. That'll be their store picks. Not store picks, but state picks that the distillery might send out. I have a bottle of that of Buffalo Trace. I don't have it with me. I'll have to show you guys those stickers though. But that 90 to 100% distillery is going to keep. 80 to 90% is typically like a store pick. Like this was a Total Wine store pick, so this is probably one of the better bottles of Old Forester single barrel strength you can get, because Total Wine had their taster go out there and try, and they're not going to give them the 90 to 100. They'll give them like the 80 to 90 range and let them pick out what their favorite is based off their nose and their palate. So whoever is your taster can really affect that. And then anything that's below that 80 percentile is probably just, bottled up and sent out as a normal bottle. Next term, small batch. It's a loose term. It's thrown around a lot. Honestly, it doesn't really mean much. Anything could really be used as or considered small batch. Like small batch for Old Forester. I mean, small batch for Buffalo Trace. Buffalo Trace has huge warehouses and tons of bottles and tons of barrels. So whatever they considered small batch is probably still a very, very large number. So it's more of a marketing term than anything. Next term would be straight, or literally the exact same word as neat. They call it straight. Although if you ask for like whiskey straight up, they will typically still give it to you neat or straight, but straight up is referring to the chilling of the spirit. So you'll put it in a shaker, they'll shake it over ice, they'll strain it out into a glass to where it'll be cold, but doing so with ice is going to dilute it and proof it down. So some people might like a higher proof that they want to dilute on their own. They can kind of control that based on how many like ice cubes they put in there or how much water they put in there to chill it over. But people might look at you crazy if you say, hey, I want it straight up, and when they look at you and you're like, I want you to shake it over ice and strain it into a glass, you might get some funny looks. Next term, flipper. So a bottle worth buying either for its resale value or someone who's intending to like buy bottles to resell on the secondary market. that's the most common term for it. I dabble in this area a little bit. It's basically where I'll go out of my way. I'll get a bottle that I might not want. Like, I don't really hunt for Jack Daniels, but if I get a bottle of Jack Daniels and I know that someone wants it and they're willing to trade for something that I do want that they have, example, if someone has Stag, I'm trading for that Stag almost all day, every day, because it's something that I really enjoy. Now, I don't recommend doing this because you're going to have to deal with secondary market. You're going to have to know some people or join some sketchy Facebook groups. Being a flipper or trading alcohol, if you're reselling alcohol, like, that's a crime. Once you buy this from the liquor store, like, you're not supposed to be reselling these. The most I would ever say you could really do is give them as a gift or do like a bottle swap, maybe. But if you start talking about selling like this bottle for money, like, that can be a criminal offense. So I would stay clear of that. Secondary market's bad. I wish everything was sold in stores. I wish it was plentiful to where everybody could get whatever bottle they want. Buffalo Trace, like BTAC collection, like a George T. Stagg, William Woodrow Weller, or like that Old Forester birthday bourbon. I wish it was everywhere. I wish anyone could get as many bottles as they wanted, that they didn't have to pay more than what the bottle's worth. People out there paying $200 for Stagg, like, that's not a $200 bottle. You shouldn't have to pay that. Why does secondary market exist? Well, supply's low, demand's high. People are willing to pay it. They're going to sell it at that price. Is it right? No, but it happens. Next term is a tater. So that's someone who chases the hype. They have this fear of missing out. So if this is like a limited release, which 22A, it's a limited release of Stagg for that batch that year, people might go crazy over this and they'll pay almost anything and everything. They typically will pay well above MSRP just so they can have this bottle because they don't want to miss out. The last two terms, I don't have them. I might put a picture on screen, I might not. A Glencairn. It's just a drinking glass that is meant for like whiskey tastings. The bottle or the glass shape is meant for like sniffing it, so you can get a nose on it and still tasting it while giving it room to aerate. Another glass that you might use would be like old-fashioned or rock glass. If you have just a normal drinking glass like at your house and it's like a shorter glass, like, typically you can use that as a rock glass. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, or just like one that you might search for on Amazon. Like, I've got two that are kind of decorated. They came with little craft ice, like the ball ice makers, so I use those in the freezer too. But those are some terms that the whiskey community might use that you might not know, or if you did know, maybe you got some clarification on like why we use the term proof and how it was more of a government sanction for finding ways to tax them. Hopefully this video was helpful, especially if you're newer to the whiskey or bourbon community where you're just getting into it. If you haven't already and you've made it this far, please like, comment, and subscribe on the video. It's RJ the Fed signing out. I'll see you guys next time.